September 9 AD. The Teutoburg Forest, Germania. You are standing in the middle of 20,000 men when the trees explode with warriors. The column stretches 4 miles. Iron, shields, eagles. Then the javelins hit. Men drop without sound. The forest screams. Germanic warriors pour from every tree line simultaneously. 10,000, then 20, then more. The Roman formation fractures. Soldiers sprint into undergrowth. Commanders lose their units in seconds. The eagles, 3 of them, gold against the gray German sky, are swallowed by the chaos. Within 6 hours, 3 full Roman legions are destroyed. 6 years later, the general Germanicus walks this same ground. He finds skulls, nailed to trees, officer insignia pressed into the mud, bones arranged in patterns the Germanic tribes left deliberately. So Rome would know exactly what happened here and exactly what it meant. The eagles are gone, but some men survived. That is the real catastrophe. The Roman Aquila was not a flag, not a symbol, not a piece of military hardware. It was a god, blessed by priests before every campaign, carried by the Aquilifer, a soldier whose singular purpose was to die before that eagle touched enemy ground. Every legion's divine spirit lived inside that gilded bird. To lose it was not a military defeat. It was a theological rupture, a legal crisis, and a political disaster detonating simultaneously inside the most powerful institution on earth. Augustus received the news of Teutoburg and reportedly spent weeks driving his skull against the walls of his palace. Contemporary sources record him screaming into empty rooms. "Varus, give me back my legions." 3 legion numbers, 17, 18, 19, were permanently struck from the Roman military roster. Rome would never write those numerals again. Not on a gravestone, not on a dedication, not anywhere. 3 legions. Erased, as if they had never existed. If you want more buried history that the textbooks deliberately skipped, subscribe now. Every week, another story Rome, or someone else, try to make disappear. But here is the detail that every popular account of Teutoburg quietly omits. Approximately 1,000 soldiers escaped that forest. They crossed the Rhine. They reported to Roman commanders at the frontier fortresses. They were breathing. They were witnesses, and within weeks, something was set in motion against them that Rome's official histories describe in almost exactly 0 sentences. Not the Germanic warriors, not the ambush, not the mud and the screaming and the 3 days of slaughter that Tacitus calls, with characteristic Roman understatement, a disaster not easily paralleled. The thing that would destroy these men was their own chain of command. The Roman Aquila had a theological value no general could calculate, but it also had a political value every general understood immediately. A lost eagle was evidence of a command failure, a strategic miscalculation, an intelligence collapse, the kind of catastrophe that ended careers in the Senate and opened criminal prosecutions. The men who survived the eagle's loss were not heroes. They were not even soldiers anymore in the eyes of Roman military law. They were witnesses. And Rome had very specific procedures from managing witnesses to events it needed to erase. What those procedures looked like, and what they did to the men who walked back across the Rhine alive, is a story that has been buried for 2,000 years. And the answer is significantly worse than anything you have been told. Marcus crosses the Rhine on a November morning with blood-soaked caligae and no weapons. No eagle. No sentry, no formation, just the man himself, moving through frost, reporting to the legate at Vetera Fortress like a soldier returning from duty, because that is exactly what he is. He held his position. He did not break. He survived an ambush that killed 19,000 men around him, and he walked back to Roman lines under his own power. He is not embraced. He is quarantined. His name goes into a ledger, not a hero's registry, a punishment ledger. The distinction is invisible to the eye and absolute in its consequences. Roman military law, the lex militaris, was among the most architecturally complex legal codes the ancient world produced. It had specific, documented provisions for exactly this situation. The operative legal term was ignominia, Military disgrace. A formal status classification that stripped a soldier of his citizenship rights, his pension entitlements, his right to reside inside any Roman city, and in severe applications, his legal right to a Roman burial. His body, if he died under ignominia, could be refused consecrated ground. But ignominia was the entry-level punishment. Polybius, a Greek historian embedded with Roman command structure in the 2nd century BC, documented the full disciplinary apparatus with the precision of a man who had watched it operate. He describes fustuarium. A soldier, convicted of a punishable infraction, is beaten to death by his own tent mates using clubs. Not by strangers, not by executioners, by the men who shared his bread and his fire for a decade. Polybius lists the triggers with clinical detachment, cowardice in battle, abandonment of post, loss of a personal weapon. Each one punishable by a fustuarium at an officer's discretion. The loss of the eagle was categorically beyond all of these. There was no sentence listed because no sentence was considered sufficient. Here is the detail that reframes everything. When Roman commanders survived eagle loss disasters, they faced prosecution in the Senate, public trials, recorded testimony, defense speeches preserved in the historical record. The general Varus died in the forest, which, from Rome's perspective, was the correct outcome. Cestius Gallus, who lost the eagle of Legio XII Fulminata at Beth Horon in 66 AD, fled in the night and died shortly after of what the sources describe, with suspicious brevity, as illness. Generals faced courts. Their names went into the record. Ordinary soldiers faced something that left no court record at all, which is precisely why, 2,000 years later, we know almost nothing about what actually happened to them. The Senate could not prosecute 20,000 dead men, but it could, and did, process the 1,000 who came back breathing. Tiberius arrives at Vetera Fortress within days of the survivors' return. He does not arrive to comfort them. He arrives to assess. The surviving units are reorganized, not reintegrated into existing legions, reorganized into designated formations, separated from the main garrison, forbidden from entering the winter quarters inside the fortress walls. They camp outside, in November, on the Rhine frontier, in tents in frozen mud, as if their survival itself is a communicable disease Rome is quarantining before it spreads. Then the announcement comes. The surviving units will undergo formal review. Soldiers who abandoned their formation, even under ambush, even under direct attack, even when their officers were already dead around them, face immediate fustuarium. The selection method is not based on testimony, not on evidence, not on witness accounts or tactical reconstruction. It is based on a single officer's assessment, delivered without appeal, enforced by the men standing directly beside the accused. Marcus watches it happen to 3 men he has known for 14 years. No trial, no testimony, just a name called out in the frost. And then the clubs. He does not speak. He does not move. He is learning the first and most critical rule of being a Roman survivor of eagle loss. Visibility is a death sentence. The men who protest are selected next. The men who weep are marked. The men who become invisible, who stand at rigid attention and let their faces go to stone, sometimes survive the review. Marcus survives. He believes the worst is behind him. He is catastrophically wrong. Here is the reframe that changes every word you have heard so far. The punishments visited on eagle loss survivors were not rage, not grief, not the irrational fury of an emperor who loved his legions too much to accept their destruction. Cross-reference 3 sources: Tacitus's Annals, Suetonius's Life of Augustus, and the fragmentary operational records of the Frumentarii, Rome's military intelligence apparatus. And a pattern emerges that is not emotional at all. It is bureaucratic. It is deliberate. And it was designed specifically to be invisible. Soldiers who survived eagle loss disasters were not executed en masse. Mass executions generate witnesses. Mass executions generate rumors that travel the trade routes to Rome, get whispered in the forum, eventually reach senators who start asking questions about what exactly happened on that frontier and who gave the orders that led to 20,000 dead Romans. Mass executions are a liability. Dispersal is not. The documented mechanism was called delectus supplementarius, supplementary draft reassignment, an administrative procedure, bureaucratically indistinguishable from normal military rotation. Survivors of punished units were transferred, individually, in small groups, never en masse, into frontier postings with the highest recorded casualty rates in the Roman military system. Desert garrisons in Syria, punitive expeditions into the Caledonian highlands, forward positions in Parthian border territory where the average soldier's lifespan was measured in campaigning seasons rather than years. No execution order was signed. No senator ever reviewed a list. The Frumentarii, Rome's internal military surveillance operatives, monitored outgoing correspondence from frontier postings, which meant the transferred soldiers could not write home about where they had been sent or why. The machine had no visible walls. It had no door to pound on. It simply absorbed men and returned nothing. The Senate never saw it. The historians largely did not record it. The men inside it had no mechanism to report it. And now Marcus receives his transfer orders. Judea. He has never been to Judea. He speaks no Aramaic. He knows no one in the Eastern legions. The unit he is being assigned to has recorded a 40% casualty rate across the last 18 months of frontier operations. He reads the orders once. He does not read them again. There is nothing in the document that says punishment. Nothing that says disgrace or ignominia or Teutoburg. It reads like a routine reassignment, a bureaucratic rotation, the kind of transfer that happens to soldiers throughout the empire every campaigning season for entirely unremarkable administrative reasons. Marcus has been a soldier for 14 years. He knows what the orders mean. He has not been punished. He has been managed. There is a precise and terrible difference between those two things. A punishment is a sentence with an endpoint. A man serving a punishment can calculate his way through it, survive the review, endure the ignominia period, wait out the disgrace, eventually return to something resembling a life. A man being managed has no endpoint to calculate toward. He is inside a system that will route him through increasingly lethal postings until probability resolves the administrative problem his survival created. He packs his equipment in the dark. He does not say farewell to anyone, because anyone he speaks to is also being watched. Now, the history books give this a name, and the name is the most misunderstood word in the Latin military lexicon. Decimation. Decimatio. Modern usage has diluted the word into a synonym for severe reduction, a loss of 10%, 20%, significant but survivable damage. The Roman original meant something geometrically precise, psychologically engineered, and specifically designed to destroy the social fabric of a military unit from the inside. Every 10th man, selected by lot, beaten to death by the other 9. No exceptions for rank. No exceptions for years of service. No exceptions for documented valor in previous campaigns. No consideration given to personal conduct during the specific failure being punished. The selection is random. That randomness is not a flaw in the system. It is the entire mechanism. Polybius understood this with perfect clarity. The terror of decimation was not that guilty men were punished. The terror was that any man could be selected regardless of guilt. It converted an entire unit, every man who held a shield in that formation, into a collective hostage situation where survival depended not on your own conduct, but on the fortune of a drawn lot. It made solidarity impossible. It made collective resistance unthinkable. You could not protect your tent mate from a random selection. You could not argue that he was brave, because bravery was not the criterion. You simply waited for the lot to fall, and then you participated in the killing, because participation was the price of not being selected yourself. Livy documents it. Frontinus documents it in stratagems. The numbers are not rhetorical exaggerations. Crassus decimated 2 full legions after the Spartacus campaign, not after a foreign defeat, but after Roman soldiers broke formation against a slave army, which Rome considered the more unforgivable failure. Approximately 1,000 men beaten to death in a single afternoon on Italian soil by their own comrades to demonstrate that the consequences of breaking in battle were more certain and more immediate than any enemy weapon. After Teutoburg, with 1,000 survivors processed at Vetera Fortress, the arithmetic was simple and irreversible. 100 men would be selected by lot. 100 men who may have fought with distinction, who may have been the last soldiers standing over their fallen officers, who survived through skill and endurance rather than cowardice. 100 of them would be beaten to death in the mud by the men standing beside them. Rome called this discipline. The selected men called it nothing. They were already dead by the time history thought to ask their names. Decimation was the punishment Rome recorded in the history books. The mechanism running silently alongside it, the dispersal system, the fermentarii surveillance, the lethal posting rotations, was the punishment Rome kept out of the history books entirely. And it was significantly more lethal. In Judea, Marcus is no longer Marcus. He is a unit number, a strength report entry, a replacement legionary assigned to fill a casualty gap in a formation he did not choose, carrying an eagle that belongs to men he has never met, serving under a commander who received his transfer file from Rhine Command and read exactly 3 lines before understanding precisely what kind of soldier had just arrived in his ranks. His name does not appear on the Legion's honor rolls. It appears in 2 documents only, the punishment ledger at Vetera Fortress and the transfer order that moved him east. Both documents are written in the bureaucratic Latin of military administration. Neither document contains the word Teutoburg. Neither document contains the word punishment. They contain unit designations, dates, and a classification code that any senior officer in the Roman military system would recognize immediately, and any civilian historian reading the record 2,000 years later would find completely unremarkable. He is invisible inside the paperwork. That invisibility is the point. And while Marcus carries his borrowed eagle through the Judean heat, something is happening in Rome that he will never witness. Something cold and permanent and architectural. Chisels on marble. The practice had name Damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. Formally, it was a Senate decree applied to disgraced emperors and treasonous officials, a legal instrument that ordered a man's name physically removed from every public inscription in the empire. Statues defaced, dedications recut, official records amended. The historical existence of the condemned person surgically extracted from the public record while his contemporaries were still alive to remember him. Rome applied the administrative version to eagle-lost legions with mechanical consistency. Legio 17, Legio 18, Legio 19, gone from every military monument, gone from every dedication stone, gone from every inscription across the entire empire from Britannia to Egypt. The numeral 17, carved into 1,000 pieces of stone across 4 decades of Roman military history, chiseled out, replaced with nothing. The negative space where the number had been left more conspicuous than the number itself, because everyone who read those dedications knew exactly which numbers were missing and exactly what their absence meant. But the erasure did not stop at unit numerals. In 1973, archaeologists excavating the waterlogged remains of the Vindolanda Fort complex on Hadrian's Wall recovered a collection of thin wooden writing tablets preserved in anaerobic mud for 19 centuries. The tablets are military administrative documents, strength reports, supply requisitions, duty rosters, personal correspondence. They're the closest thing to Roman military paperwork that has survived anywhere in the archaeological record. And their strength reports contain a specific, recurring omission that took scholars years to fully interpret. Replacement soldiers transferred into frontier units. Men who arrived from other postings, filling casualty gaps, frequently have their unit of origin removed from the paperwork. Not corrupted by age or damage. Deliberately omitted at the point of original entry. The scribes who wrote these reports knew where these men came from. They chose not to record it. Men transferred from punished units had their military origin systematically erased from the administrative record at the moment of transfer. They existed. Their bodies existed. Their labor and their blood existed. Their origin, the unit, the battle, the eagle, was gone. They were soldiers without a past, inserted into the machine at a specific point in its operation, with no documented history preceding that insertion, as if they had materialized from nothing on the day their transfer orders were processed. Rome did not simply punish the men who lost the eagle. It erased the evidence that those men had ever served, because their service was proof of a failure. And the failure belonged to someone much higher in the chain of command than any legionary standing in a Judean garrison with borrowed equipment and a classification code, where his unit history should have been. The eagle of Legio 19 was recovered by Germanicus in 16 AD, 7 years after Teutoburg, found somewhere in the forests east of the Rhine, taken from a Germanic tribe during Germanicus's punitive campaigns. Tacitus records the recovery with unusual emotional register for a writer who typically describes military events with a detachment of a coroner. Soldiers wept. Officers ordered the eagle cleaned and reconsecrated by priests. A religious ceremony was performed in the forest where the slaughter had happened, on ground still scattered with the bones of the men who had carried that eagle into the ambush 7 years earlier. Rome held a triumph in 17 AD. Tiberius rode through the streets. The crowds filled the forum. The eagle was displayed publicly, proof of Roman resilience, Roman persistence, Roman divine favor restored after temporary interruption. Official records documented the triumph in precise detail. The route, the participants, the religious rites performed, the political symbolism carefully managed for maximum public impact. The men who died carrying that eagle, not mentioned. The men who survived the ambush and were processed through Vetera fortress and dispersed to suicidal postings across the empire, not mentioned. The men beaten to death in the mud outside the fortress walls during the punishment reviews, not mentioned. Marcus, dying in Judea in a year we cannot specify because the record that would tell us was deliberately omitted from his transfer paperwork, not mentioned. The Aquila stood in the temple of Mars altar, the temple of Mars the Avenger, built by Augustus specifically to house recovered eagles and honor Roman military glory. It stood there for generations. Roman citizens walked past it. Children were brought to see it. It gleamed in the temple light, gold and permanent, and untouched by the chaos of the forest where it had fallen and the blood of the men who had failed to hold it. The men legally classified as ignominiosi, the disgraced, were forbidden by law from entering that temple. They could not walk past the eagle they had bled to protect. They could not stand in the building Rome built to celebrate its recovery. The legal status imposed on them for surviving the battle specifically prohibited their presence in the space where the object of that battle was displayed as a monument to Roman invincibility. The eagle was a god. The men who carried it into the forest were equipment. And here, at the absolute center of this story, is the irony that Rome designed and executed with perfect precision. The triumph celebrated the eagle's return without ever acknowledging that the eagle had been lost. The official narrative was not "we lost the eagle and then we recovered it." The official narrative was Roman power was temporarily challenged and then Roman power prevailed, with the 16-year interval between those two events compressed into a single arc of inevitable Roman triumph. The men who filled that interval, who lived and died inside those 16 years in the administrative silence between the loss and the recovery, were the interval. They were the evidence that the compression was a lie. Erasing them was not cruelty. It was editing. Rome was not a civilization that tolerated unedited history. The full operational scope of what Rome did to eagle loss survivors does not live in a single battle. It lives in a pattern that spans 3 centuries, 3 continents, and 3 catastrophes that the popular history of Rome consistently treats as separate, unrelated military disasters. They were not separate. They were iterations. In 53 BC, at Kari in modern southeastern Turkey, the Roman general Crassus led 7 legions into Parthian territory and walked them into a slaughter that rivaled Teutoburg in scale and surpassed it in humiliation. The Parthian cavalry destroyed the Roman formation with horse archers, a weapon Rome had no tactical answer for, and Crassus died in the aftermath, killed during a failed negotiation in circumstances that ancient sources describe with conspicuous vagueness. Multiple eagles fell into Parthian hands. The survivors, soldiers from Legio I and Legio III who escaped the killing ground, withdrew into Syrian territory and reported to Roman commanders on the eastern frontier. The official record of what happened to those men across the following years is sparse to the point of erasure. What the record does document, in careful detail, is Syrian garrison assignments, desert postings, frontier rotations in territory with endemic disease, mortality, and hostile rating that made survival a statistical exception rather than a military expectation. The soldiers of Carey disappear into the eastern frontier the way Marcus disappeared into Judea, individually, administratively, without spectacle. The eagles of Carey were not recovered for 33 years. In 20 BC, Augustus negotiated their return from the Parthian king Phraates IV as a diplomatic settlement. No battle, no campaign, a political transaction conducted through intermediaries. Rome received the eagles back, and Augustus's response was immediate and architecturally permanent. Coins were minted depicting the recovered standards. A triumphal arch was erected in the forum. The temple of Mars Altar, the same temple that would later house the Teutoburg eagles, was built specifically to celebrate this recovery, among others. The coins depicted eagles. The arch depicted eagles. The temple housed eagles. Not one official monument, coin, inscription, or public dedication named a single soldier who had served at Carey, survived Carey, or endured 33 years of punitive frontier posting between the battle and the diplomatic recovery. In 66 AD, the legate Cestius Gallus marched Legio XII Fulminata into Judea to suppress the Jewish revolt and encountered resistance at Beth Horon that his tactical planning had not accounted for. He retreated. In the retreat, the legion abandoned its artillery, its siege equipment, its supply train, and its eagle. Gallus withdrew to the coast and died shortly afterward. The sources cite illness with a brevity that Roman historians reserved for deaths they found convenient not to examine. The eagle of Legio XII Fulminata vanishes from the historical record at Beth Horon and does not reappear. It was never recovered. The legion's subsequent fate under Nero is documented in almost exactly 0 sentences of official Roman history. Almost. The fragmentary records that survive, cross-referenced against Josephus's Jewish War and the administrative patterns visible in the Vindolanda tablets, suggest Legio XII Fulminata was restructured, its surviving personnel dispersed into eastern frontier postings, and its numeral quietly retired from active use. The mechanism is identical to the Teutoburg response. The documentation is even thinner, because by 66 AD the system had been operating long enough that its administrators had refined it to near-perfect bureaucratic invisibility. Map the 3 disasters together. Carey, 53 BC. Teutoburg, 9 AD. Beth Horon, 66 AD. Collectively, approximately 60,000 Roman soldiers killed across 3 catastrophic eagle loss events. The survivors of all 3 dispersed, reassigned, erased from administrative records at the point of transfer, number in the thousands. The number publicly honored for their conduct in any of these disasters, commemorated on any monument, named in any official dedication across the entire surviving corpus of Roman public inscriptions. 0. The number erased, dispersed, or administratively processed in a probable death, unknown. Unknown because the mechanism of disappearance was the removal of the records that would allow us to count them. Every eagle eventually came back to Rome. 2 of the 3 Teutoburg eagles were recovered within a decade. The Carey eagles returned after 33 years. The Beth Horon eagle never returned, and that absence is the most honest thing Rome ever accidentally left in a historical record. The one eagle Rome could not recover is the one disaster where the cover story breaks down entirely, because there was no triumphant recovery to build a narrative around. There were only the missing eagle, the dead general, and the soldiers whose names were removed from paperwork on the eastern frontier. What never came back from any of them was the accounting. Here is how the silence was engineered and why it held for 2,000 years. The primary literary sources for Roman military history, Polybius, Livy, Tacitus, Suetonius, Josephus, were all writing within systems of Roman patronage, Roman censorship, and Roman political consequence. Polybius wrote for the Roman elite who wanted to understand the mechanisms of Roman power. Tacitus wrote under emperors who maintained active oversight of publishable historical content. Suetonius worked inside the imperial administrative apparatus. None of them were operating with the independence that would have allowed a full accounting of what Rome did to its own soldiers after Eagle Loss disasters. They recorded what the system permitted them to record. The administrative documents that would have told the complete story, the punishment ledgers of Iterative, the transfer orders routing survivors to lethal postings, the frumentarii surveillance files tracking outgoing correspondence from frontier garrisons, were stored inside Legion headquarters. Legion headquarters were located on the frontiers. The frontiers were destroyed in the same wars that generated the Eagle losses in the first place. Teutoburg consumed the records of the Rhine legions along with the legions themselves. The Judean revolt consumed the records of the Eastern garrison system. The documents that would have named Marcus and thousands like him burned in the same fires that killed them. The Vindolanda tablets survived because someone buried them, not deliberately. The fort was abandoned. The ground swallowed the administrative waste of a frontier garrison, and 19 centuries of anaerobic mud preserved what fire and war and deliberate erasure had not reached. They're the accidental archive. The documents that were never supposed to outlast the empire that produced them. What they show, read against the grain of their bureaucratic language, is a system that processed human beings with the same administrative logic it applied to damaged equipment. Catalog the asset. Assess the liability. Reassign to a context where loss is statistically probable and individually untraceable. Remove the origin marker from the paperwork at the point of transfer. File the strength report. Move to the next case. The eagles stood in the temple of Mars' altar for generations after the men who carried them were gone. Roman tourists walked past them. Roman schoolchildren were brought to stand before them and learn what Roman invincibility looked like in gold. The temple priests maintained them. The emperors pointed to them as evidence that Rome's divine favor was permanent and its military failures temporary. The men whose blood purchased the interval between the loss and the recovery. The men beaten to death in the mud of Iterative. The men shipped to Judea and Syria and the Caledonian frontier to die in administrative silence. The men whose names were chiseled from stone and omitted from paperwork and buried in unmarked ground across 4 continents. They have no monument anywhere on earth. Not one stone, not one inscription, not one coin. The eagles survived because Rome needed them to survive. The men were erased because Rome needed the silence more than it needed the soldiers. And the silence held. For 2,000 years, the official story was discipline, honor, and the sacred bond between Rome and its divine standards. The buried story, the one living in punishment ledgers and missing transfer records and the deliberate gaps in Vindolanda strength reports, is the story of what an empire does when it cannot afford the truth about how it nearly fell. It does not bury the failure. It buries the witnesses. Rome was not the only power that perfected this mechanism. If this history hit differently than what you expected, subscribe now and share this with someone who thinks they know how empires really work. The next video covers another government, another war, another set of soldiers whose survival became the liability their commanders needed to manage. The method is older than Rome. The silence is still holding in places you would not expect. Stay on screen.